Hello, James here. Welcome to the first instalment of the Friday review. I thought for this first instalment we would look at an absolute rock classic, and I'm going to be reviewing this album. This is Kiss, Destroyer. That's the cover. This is the copy that I've had in my collection for many years, since approximately 1983, 1984. Released, of course, on the Casablanca label, the great disco label, which also had Kiss on their roster. Okay, so just a few facts before we press on to talking about the album and to talking about Kiss. This album was released on March the 15th, 1976. It was recorded between the 3rd and 6th of September 1975 at Electric Ladyland Studios and also at the Record Plant Studios in New York City. It was produced by Bob Ezrin, who even back then he'd worked with Alice Cooper and was one of the big kind of rock producers of the era. This was a conscious decision on the part of the band. They'd already made 3 studio albums which hadn't sold all that well, although their sales were increasing. But the first 3 studio Kiss albums, that's Kiss, Hotter Than Hell and Dressed to Kill, they were all quite lo-fi. Kiss had not worked at that point with a really big recording engineer or producer, and it was only when they released or when they recorded their first live album, Kiss Alive, which had paired them up with the famous Jimi Hendrix engineer Eddie Kramer, that they started to think a bit bigger. And of course Kiss Alive 2 made them a really big stadium act, and they knew after that they couldn't just go back to doing kind of lo-fi records, and they wanted to team up with Bob Ezrin because he knew how to make an album that was going to stand the test of time. And what Bob brought to the table is that he was able to conceptualize the band, and he was able to look at what they had to offer visually and to craft something in the studio which was properly representative of their sound, because those first 3 studio albums, when you listen to them, there's a sort of disparity between the image, which is very powerful, rock and roll and epic, and the sound of those records. Even though they are good records, all 3 of them have some good songs, the sound is not very ambitious, so they wanted to have a much more ambitious musical palette. And to that end, they allowed Bob Ezrin to kind of rebuild them musically. I think it was Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley who were most keen to see this happen. I don't think Frehley and Peter Criss were as keen, and in fact, after this record, the band returned to a much more stripped back approach. But for this album, at least, for this one album, they really tried to push the boat out and do something very musically interesting. And this still stands up as one of the best produced albums of the era, I think. So yeah, Bob really took them to task. Bob took them almost into a classroom situation. He established quite quickly that they didn't understand any musical theory. And completely unfathomably, Peter Criss, the drummer, apparently didn't even understand what 4/4 time was. So Bob Ezrin decided to sort of give them a crash course in music theory, and he used to wear a whistle around his neck, and he used to blow this whistle to try and get some discipline in the studio. And Paul and Gene in particular, I think, were used to running their own ship, so this came as something of a shock to the system. And Bob also had an expression which he used to use. Well, Kiss themselves said it was like being at boot camp, but he used to say to them, "Campers, we're going to work." And this was all part of him, I think, trying to get Kiss to pull their socks up in a way and say, look, you are now this big stadium act, you've got this incredible image, let's do something musically which is going to be representative of who you are. Let's just talk a little bit about the track. So, the album starts off with Detroit Rock City, which has to be one of the kind of crowning glories of the heavy rock era. It's just got the most monumental riff. It's got some fantastic drumming by Peter Criss, far and away better than any drumming he'd done so far. Really fast, really propulsive, really well played and well executed. He had to be trained by Ezrin. He was really put through his paces. The album starts, of course, with a series of sound effects of someone in their kitchen getting ready to go out. You hear the radio first, the transistor radio, playing a Kiss song, Rock and Roll All Night, and then you hear the guy getting into his truck and driving off, and then you hear a little bit of the riff of the song on the radio, and then it turns into the full big studio version. Just one of the great Kiss tracks. Clearly it's been in the set ever since, and they've made great use of it over the years to do great big stunning displays of, you know, pyrotechnic entertainment. But it's a great song. It basically tells the story of a trucker driving down a freeway, and he doesn't really care whether he lives or dies, and the song ends with this massive pile up, and you hear all this kind of carnage as the truck crashes, and he sings the line, "I've got to laugh because I know I'm going to die." And it just kind of sums up that rock and roll, just driving into the night, not caring whether you live or die. Absolutely fantastic album opener, one of the great album openers of all time. Then it goes into King of the Nighttime World, which is a cover version which I believe was written by Kim Fowley, and it is it's not quite as good as Detroit Rock City. It's got a good, it's a very commercial song. You know, Kiss often dabbled in what you might call pop music, really. You know, their roots lay in a lot of pop stuff, Beatles and the sort of poppier end of the Stones, and you can also hear, I think, a bit of Motown in their music, but we'll come to that later. So King of the Nighttime World, it takes a little bit of a dip. It doesn't quite sustain the momentum of Detroit Rock City, but it's still a good song. And then the third track is God of Thunder. Now this song, interestingly, was written by Paul Stanley, and it was meant to be Paul's anthem, but Bob Ezrin heard it in the studio, and he said, "Why on earth is Paul singing this one? This is clearly a Gene song." Because of the lyrics, it's a kind of evocation of, you know, some sort of demonic entity, you know, the God of Thunder. It made much more sense for Gene to sing it. Gene sang it in his inimitable style, and the song is a brilliant studio production. It has lots of apocalyptic sound effects, it has like children's voices, and the riff is just one of the great rock riffs, you know, dun, 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 dun. And it was always a centrepiece in Kiss concerts for Gene to do his full kind of, you know, fire-breathing act. Just a great song, and it's a perfect illustration, I think, of what a great team Kiss were, because the song is written by Paul Stanley, and yet it is Gene's anthem, you know, and that's one of the great things about the original Kiss lineup, before it all went sour, that a bit like the Beatles, they were a unit, and they knew how to get the best out of each other. And I should say, so far, Ace Frehley on this record just plays some absolutely great guitar. Although it has to be said that, I think I'm right in saying this, that Bob was not terribly patient with Ace in the studio. One of the reasons why Ace didn't really like working with him and didn't really want to work with him again after this was that he didn't necessarily let Ace just wail away and do what he wanted. It was more a case of trying to come up with parts and specific solos and things. And I think Ace was almost made to feel like if he didn't deliver the goods, if he didn't play the solo the way Bob wanted him to, then Bob would have got somebody else in to do it. I'm not sure if that actually was the case, whether he got some other guitarists in. I'm sure there'll be other Kiss fans on here, he'll be able to put me right on that. But yeah, Ace didn't feel all that comfortable around Bob, I think for that reason. And then the side one finishes with Great Expectations, which is a kind of piano-led ballad. It's an odd song, really. It's not a heavy rock song at all. It's a ballad, but it's not a love song. It's basically Gene addressing his fans and saying to them, "Look, I get it. I absolutely get it. You know, you idolise me, but let me tell you, you have great expectations." It is an odd song. You don't know whether he's kind of mocking the fans, or whether he's more saying, he's either saying you've got great expectations, as in there's no way in hell that you could ever get to know me, or, you know, have a relationship with me, or maybe he's saying you've got great expectations, as in, you know, I am this great rock star, so therefore your expectations are great. You know, you think that you're going to get to know me, and what a great expectation that is. There's a really clever ambiguity there. I think later on, a lot of these songs that Kiss did that were self-aggrandizing, you know, they could become really almost nauseating. You know, the way that Gene in particular had of making himself seem really great all the time, it could become a bit nauseating. But on this album, they get it just about right, because you really do get the sense that they're playing characters. You know, it's not Gene, it is the God of Thunder. And that is, again, because of Bob Ezrin's input, it has the children's choir on it. Nothing like what you'd expect from Kiss. It completely takes it away from street level rock and roll and turns it into a big production number. It's not a brilliant song, but it's a really good track. And then side 2 starts out with probably the 2 most disposable songs on the album, and I don't think Kiss themselves were all that fond of them. Flaming Youth, which has a bit of a kind of cheesy organ thing going on, and a slightly odd time signature in the choruses, which Bob had to coach them to do. And then Sweet Pain, which is kind of short and sweet. Both those tracks are all right, but I think of all the tracks on the album, those 2 are probably the most disposable, and the 2 that you think, well, this is a kind of, classic album. Could those 2 tracks have been better? I suspect they probably could have been. But, they just are what they are. But then the 3rd track on side 2 is an absolute Kiss belter, Shout It Out Loud. And I mentioned before how Kiss, I think, did have a bit of a Motown influence. It sounds odd to say, but they did, I think. They had a Beatles influence, they had a Motown influence. They were very diverse in their tastes, Kiss way. They were not just a straight heavy rock band, heavy metal band. They drew on lots and lots of different things. And Shout It Out Loud almost could have been a Motown song. It's got that kind of dancing in the street fervour to it. And I love the way that it kind of blends the vocals of Gene and Paul. They kind of take it in turns. I think they sing half a verse each, don't they? And then it all kind of comes in on the chorus. And it has this great kind of grand piano part in it, which really thickens the sound out and gives it this really kind of, vibey, almost churchy feel. Just a great pop song. Quite kind of timeless in a way. And I love the sentiment of it. Don't let them tell you that there's too much noise. They're too old to really understand. It's really like a clarion call. It was a rewriting, I think, of Rock and Roll All Night, which is their other great kind of party anthem. And that's what Kiss were great at doing. They were great at communicating this idea that rock and roll was a young person's thing and it was a good thing. They gave off a lot of very positive messages about rock and roll and what rock and roll could do, and Shout It Out Loud is one of the best of their songs, expressing that idea, I think. Come and have a party, let it all hang out, let's have a good time, don't listen to your mum and dad. And I think that message, coupled with their image, was largely responsible for how successful they were. Then we have Beth, which is a landmark song for the band, Peter Criss's song, which he co-wrote, and it's just a very slow, sentimental ballad. He used to perform it sitting on a tall stool. It was one for the girls in the audience. It was a stroke of genius on the part of the band and on the part of Bob Ezrin, who wanted it on the record. They knew that they had to expand their listenership. It wasn't just going to be about hairy blokes in denim jackets anymore. They were going to reach out and they were going to appeal to the girlfriends of the hairy blokes in the denim jackets. And Beth just is what it is, I'm not all that fond of it as a song. I think it's a good song. It's not one I play every day, but it works in this album. It's completely in keeping with the diversity and the eclecticism of this record. It absolutely works fine. And it's good where it is as well. It's just before the end, because the album then closes with Do You Love Me, which is one of the great all-time Kiss songs. Absolutely fantastic arrangement by Bob Ezrin with the bells at the end and the kind of slow fade out. A bit like Shout It Out Loud, it's got that kind of party atmosphere. And again, a bit like Great Expectations, it has fun with that idea of the kind of preening vanity of the rock star, As Kiss went along, they started to live that more and more, and I think in the end they became almost a caricature of themselves, and it became quite hard to stomach, the big-headedness. But at this stage in their career, they'd only just become big, and they were playing it as characters, I think. And with Bob Ezrin, they really, I think with this album, managed to craft a sound that encapsulated who they were. And that song, Do You Love Me, I think it really expresses there was a kind of neediness at the heart of what Kiss did. It wasn't just about them being great, it was about them needing the affirmation from the audience, needing to be told that they were great. And Kiss always had that reciprocal thing with the audience. When they came on stage, it was Kiss, but it was the audience, and the feedback between the audience and the band. Other bands have done that too, just as well. Queen, I'm thinking of. But Kiss certainly had that very, very direct, one-to-one relationship with their fans, the Kiss Army. and that was one of the reasons that they became, so absolutely huge. And this album is a complete crowning glory, I think, in their back catalogue. And after this, they probably took a little bit of a step backwards, really, and it's tempting to imagine an alternative history in which they stayed with Bob Ezrin and made several more albums in this vein. They did eventually end up back with him again a couple of times, the first time with The Elder, which wasn't successful at all, and basically brought the curtain down on the band's makeup era, really. And then later on they made another album called Revenge, which was a great album, but it was a time in their career when commercially they were flagging quite badly. They were at the end of the non-makeup era at that point and about to go back into the makeup. So it's certainly tempting to imagine what would have happened if, after this album, rather than going back with Eddie Kramer and doing Rock and Roll All Night and then Love Gun, they'd have stuck with this and tried to take this a stage further. And I think Gene Simmons has kind of said that himself, that he thinks that it was Ace Frehley and Peter Criss who kind of held them back at this point. And they really should have gone with their instincts and continued making music of this calibre. The cover design, just before we finish, is by Ken Kelly and is obviously one of the great album covers. And that's all I have to say. Kiss Destroyer, just a great album. If you don't have it in your collection, if you have an idea that Kiss are a bit naff, because there are some people out there who think that, just try and bury that. Listen to the album, take it for what it is. It's not meant to be great art, it's not meant to be Bob Dylan, it's not meant to be Shostakovich. It's Kiss, it's Destroyer. Thank you.